Aristotle's philosophy of education, key concepts. This video lecture discusses the key concepts of Aristotle's philosophy of education. It argues that Aristotle is of immense value to teachers today in reinforcing and strengthening the values of moral education, which we can embed within our own teaching philosophy, and providing a theoretical rationale for the value of inquiry-based learning approaches and hands-on experiences. To fully make sense of Aristotle's philosophy of education, it is important that we briefly talk about his life and works. Aristotle is a towering figure in ancient Greek philosophy, who made important contributions to logic, criticism, rhetoric, physics, biology, psychology, mathematics, metaphysics, ethics, and politics. He was a student of Plato for 20 years, but is famous for rejecting Plato's theory of forms. He was more empirically minded than both Plato and Plato's teacher, Socrates. A prolific writer, lecturer, and polymath, Aristotle radically transformed most of the topics he investigated. In his lifetime, he wrote dialogues and as many as 200 treatises, of which only 31 survive. These works are in the form of lecture notes and draft manuscripts never intended for general readership. Nevertheless, they are the earliest complete philosophical treatises we still possess. As the father of Western logic, Aristotle was the first to develop a formal system for reasoning. He observed that the deductive validity of any argument can be determined by its structure rather than its content. For example, in the syllogism, "All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal." Even if the content of the argument were changed from being about Socrates to being about someone else, because of its structure, as long as the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true. Aristotelian logic dominated until the rise of modern propositional logic and predicate logic 2,000 years later. The emphasis on good reasoning serves as the backdrop for Aristotle's other investigations. In his natural philosophy, Aristotle combines logic with observation to make general, causal claims. For example, in his biology, Aristotle uses the concept of species to make empirical claims about the functions and behavior of individual animals. However, as revealed in his psychological works, Aristotle is no reductive materialist. Instead, he thinks of the body as the matter, and the psyche as the form of each living animal. Though his natural scientific work is firmly based on observation, Aristotle also recognizes the possibility of knowledge that is not empirical. In his metaphysics, he claims that there must be a separate and unchanging being that is the source of all other beings. In his ethics, he holds that it is only by becoming excellent that one could achieve eudaimonia, a sort of happiness or blessedness that constitutes the best kind of human life. Aristotle was the founder of the Lyceum, a school based in Athens, Greece, and he was the first of the Peripatetics, his followers from the Lyceum. Aristotle's works exerted tremendous influence on ancient and medieval thought and continue to inspire philosophers to this day. Aristotle on education. For Aristotle, the development of a moral character was to be the aim of education. For Aristotle, therefore, the education of children and young people should extend beyond learning about academia and useful skills to a greater understanding of moral and social values and to a cultivation of a personal moral character. Aristotle believes that education is crucial if the human person is to achieve fulfillment of the possibilities of her character. Indeed, Aristotle believes that the supreme good to which we all aspire to is happiness, but the happy person is neither noble nor savage, but instead she is an educated person. As Aristotle writes, the happy man, the good man, is a virtuous man, but virtuous is acquired precisely through education. Now, for Aristotle, virtue involves behaving in the right manner, and as a mean between extremes of excess and deficiency, which are both vices. For Aristotle, intellectual virtue develops and grows because of teaching, while moral virtue emerges from a result of habit. The development of a habit is tied into a well-rounded education, where students learn by engaging in an activity or task repeatedly, whether that habit be a skill such as a musical instrument, completing an ethical act, or making virtuous decisions. Education can assist in this process. When it comes to moral education, Aristotle believes that practice to form the habits should come before theoretical study of morality. Therefore, the teaching of virtue and morality comes second to the actual practice of it in the classroom and school environment. Indeed, moral education's purpose is not to make people good, but rather to demonstrate to them what is good, why it is good, and how we might be able to generate goodness in our society. As Aristotle writes, children will need to be taught not just to do right, because it is imposed upon them, but they will need to aspire it for themselves, as they turn their virtuous behavior into habits. Intellectual virtues, for Aristotle, represent traits of character such as being able to judge the truth of the matter and understanding the nature of things, while moral virtues are habits of living that involve the whole person and include justice, temperance, prudence, and fortitude, where they are characterized by desire and emotion. Aristotle explores these ideas in his famous work titled The Nicomachean Ethics, a text which consists of 10 books, and from where he argues that the man who is to be good must be well trained and habituated. Speaking of happiness, Aristotle argues that it can only become accessible through education, with it being the touchstone of Aristotelian ethics, with the virtues, wisdom, and happiness acquired through this. Hence, virtue for Aristotle comes when we obtain happiness or goodness, with goodness lying across two categories, namely, goodness of intellect and goodness of character. On the one hand, goodness of intellect can be enhanced through education and is the result of training and experience, and on the other, goodness of character occurs because of habit, which can be engineered by keeping good habits. It is important to note that one of the central concepts in Aristotle's philosophy of education is the view that it was the responsibility of the state to provide for education of the people. As we can see, Aristotle is a strong advocate for public education. Indeed, the only extended discussion of his philosophy of education that survives is that held within Book 8 of the Politics, where Aristotle argues that schooling should be provided by the state and must be one and the same for all. Aristotle was also interested in continuing education, recognizing that it was not limited to children and young people, but that it needed to take a whole life perspective, with this being organized in stages of 7 years at a time. Preschool education denotes the very first stage, with the parents, and specifically the father, responsible for their children's education, as noted in his book The Nicomachean Ethics. Games should be used as the basic tool of education until a child is 5. Between 5 and 7, they should merely be spectators in the lessons they will later go on to learn, and at 7, the child should attend school up to 21 years of age. Unfortunately, much of Aristotle's work has been lost, so we do not have the details of how schooling was structured or any details about adult education. However, what we do know is that Aristotle believed in a system of continuing education and in supporting learning throughout the lifespan. Ultimately, Aristotle's philosophy of education sees a well-educated person as somebody who seeks out a balanced life, is capable of pursuing a range of interests including in music, public speaking, philosophy, and the like.